Hello and welcome. Hello, hello, hello. Let me know if you can hear me. Let me know if the sound is all right, okay? I'm going to be testing some things out. Um, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and because there's new peace talks, I think it's appropriate for me to do a little bit of military analysis on why the peace talks are not working, why they haven't worked up until now. Um, I think that people haven't done it the way I'm going to do it. So, yeah, I think it'll be a fun, quick live. We're gonna let some people load in. I have an interesting, well, from what I think is an interesting show. So again, we'll let people load in and we'll see. This is live. So if you're watching right now, this is live. Let me know if you guys can hear me. I know some of the people already said the sound is okay. Let me know if everyone who's right now on the stream, let me know if the stream is live for you. Is the sound okay? I'm going to be doing a military analysis, which is going to double as a reason why this conflict hasn't had an end yet, why this conflict hasn't had a peace deal, and you can see it on the battlefield. Here, let me try something then. It's a bit soft. Okay. The sound's all right. I'll try it a little bit louder on the microphones. Okay, can you hear me now? Usually when I put the microphone on, we get a lot of glitches on the camera because I disconnect the camera from the computer. This is hopefully sounding a little bit better. Okay, I want to do a military analysis as we look at the conflict from day one until now. I don't remember how many peace deals have happened, but clearly you can see on the battlefield why Russia is not accepting accepting the terms given to them by the West. That's one thing you can see on the battlefield, and there's also another thing that you can tell is why Ukraine hasn't been accepting is because obviously they've been egged on by the West, but ever so often when there's going to be new peace talks, they do something ridiculous, and that's going to show on the map. So let's go ahead and start. For me, it's one of my dreams to do this type of live, so hopefully it goes well. Okay, we're going to position ourselves. We're going to position ourselves over here near Moldova and Romania. That way we're out of the map, okay? As you guys can see, this is the map on February 24, 2022. We're going to press play on this and you're going to see the advancement and the movement of the Russian Federation and of Ukraine. This is, of course, going to show you Ukraine in blue, and it's going to show you the Russian Federation in red. If you can't hear me now, this is not my problem. At this point, you guys are going to have to put the volume up. I'm looking at my volume and it's hitting the yellow bar. Okay, so let's get this started. So in the beginning of the conflict, and it happens almost instantly, obviously, this is already occupied Crimea here on the bottom, and this is Donetsk and Lugansk. These are territories that were already in their own civil war. You could say essentially trying to come out. So this light red is representing what the West would consider as occupied, light red. Darker red is the Russian Federation, light red also in Crimea. But of course, Crimea was already properly annexed by the Russian Federation. The Donetsk and the Lugansk regions are still in light. This is before they were annexed properly by the Russian Federation. Now pay attention to what happens in the first few days. Okay, this is day 2, because on day 1, it's February 2, and then day 3, you can see the sporadic movement of the Russian Federation. Now, what you can tell from the beginning is they went in every direction, okay? A lot of people, when they were studying what the Russians were doing, what we can call the Blitz, they were basically saying that this Blitz was not planned. They went running around like chickens with their heads cut off, sorry. But it is not really what's happening. In a conflict this big, you are going to have to poke. You're going to have to see where you can go in through. And obviously, they hit in every major direction. Up here, this is Kyiv. This is the capital of Ukraine. You have Zaporozhye here. The reason why you see a massive push is obviously because the Crimean Peninsula is here. And what do the Russians do? They push up towards Melitopol. I guess it's Melitopol. Oh, whatever. This region here was already the closest to one of the biggest gatherings. I think Rostov-on-Don is on this side, so you can see the two major groups, the two biggest groups are coming out of Crimea and Rostov-on-Don. Okay, these are the two biggest spears. And you do have the one spear that comes north of the capital of Ukraine, but this is obviously the group that comes out of the north is one of the weakest. And it's not because they lack the power, but they're the weakest because they're up against the biggest resistance near the capital of Ukraine. This is where you're going to see the majority, the bulk of the soldiers, the bulk of quick reaction forces. This is the capital. This is supposed to be the most protected area. Of course, we have the fortified regions of the Donetsk. Donetsk and Lugansk had been militarized for so long. The Donbass was obviously very militarized, but they had a limited amount of people because this is on the eastern side of the Dnieper River. Okay, so this is something that you guys have to take into account. This, if you follow my mouse and where you can see, this is the Dnieper. And everything east of this is very hard, even till today, to logistically keep alive. So these are the three major groups, I guess you could say, but the strongest being out of Crimea and Rostov-on-Don, and the weakest being the portion that came out of Belarus and got really close to the capital. Let's continue. This is day 1. Look how fast. Now, just by looking at this map, you can see that they've emphasized the work on the Eastern Front. The Russians put way more emphasis on the Eastern Front. A lot of the Westerners will say, well, they were supposed to take Kiev in 3 days. The plan was to take Kiev in 3 days. In war, you need more than one plan. Okay, in war, you must execute more than one plan at the same time. This northern group obviously had a hard time trying to get into Kiev. Okay, this northern group is probably the weakest, not because of how strong they are, but because of how strong their enemies are. But look at this look at how much they took here in the Donbass region. What does that tell you? What does that tell you? Would you believe it if I told you that was the plan all along? You know, to feint towards the capital, pull resources from the Ukrainians to go somewhere else, attack in all directions, but put a huge emphasis on the Donbass region. Why would it not be true? Why would it not be true that the Donbass was always the goal of the Russian Federation? These were the regions that were being oppressed by the Ukrainian government. Also, it builds a land bridge to the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Peninsula was being starved. It was being parched. It wasn't allowed to have water because the Ukrainians were just taking the water. They were also suffering on that peninsula. So it is my belief, my military analysis is that in fact they were trying to take the Donbass region. That was always the goal. Zaporozhye also falls in there because you needed to make the land bridge. And to me, it's so strange. To me, it's so strange that Russia really didn't push towards Kharkiv. But that's a story that we're going to talk about later. Because if you look at the map, Kharkiv is right here. And it probably gets occupied. Let's see. Oh, there was a massive retreat from the northern section here. Focus up here on this portion. So right now, Russia has a lot of this. It has Kherson, all of Kherson city on eastern and western side of the Dnieper. Has parts of Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Lugansk. Okay, these are the 4 annexed territories. Look what happens once they have a firm control of this. Look at this massing in the north. Disappears in a few days. It disappears in a few days. Now, what we're saying is occupied until liberated, because to liberate something, you need to annex it. Occupying is for both sides. You can occupy a region, but you must conquer it and then bring it into your country officially. The Russian Federation would later annex them appropriately and legally. And this is no more an occupation of a land, because you have to fight for it. You have to fight for land, you have to occupy it, and then annex it properly. But listen, if it bothers you that I'm saying occupied, of course, these territories were later liberated as they were annexed appropriately, okay? Don't make a big deal out of those words. Now, a lot of these tactical retreats that you're going to see were considered major victories by the Ukrainians and by the Western media. These are the type of things that made the original peace deals go out of the window. Okay? When Ukraine was offered, hey, this is the peace deal, they would say, no, we just took your forces out of the capital. We just shooed them away. It was kind of a false hope for the Ukrainians. The Russians didn't need to occupy the area north of the capital. This is dead ground. This is unnecessary ground. So what happens? They bring their forces back on the Belarusian border and they ship them, or they transport them towards the Donbass region, which was always the major goal and the major focus of the Russian Federation. So now we see in early 2022, Boris, what the heck is his name? Mr. Boris, what the heck is his dumb name? Boris Johnson. There it is. Boris Johnson. Early 2022, Boris Johnson said, no, you have to continue fighting. What happens? Ukrainians see the tactical retreat from the Russians and say, wait a minute, we have a chance. No peace deal. They get egged on by Boris Johnson. And this is how the first peace deals went down the drain. By the Ukrainians getting overzealous, by seeing what's happening on the battlefield, and they take it as a major success by the Ukrainian side. That is not what's happening. This is happening in the first few days of the conflict. Okay, let's continue watching this. Now let's put our focus here on the Kharkiv Oblast. This where my mouse is, because this is going to be another place where there's another huge tactical retreat, and of course here in Kherson. And both of them have a really good reason why there's going to be a retreat, and we're going to talk about it when it happens on the map. But around this time, there was other peace deals trying to be brokered towards Ukraine. And again, these things played a big role into why Ukraine, again, being over ambitious and overconfident, would deny peace deals. You can see the Russians are moving steadily on the Eastern Front in the Donbass region. There's not a lot of movement day to day because the major battles have not happened yet. There we go. Did you guys see that? I want you to focus where my mouse is, in this pocket here. And I want you to realize what happens there and towards what direction the mass movement happens, okay? I want you to see why I'm going to tell you the following fact. 1 second. Let me get some things ready for you here. Okay, here we go. By the way, are you guys able to see this mapping? Let me know in the chat if what I'm showing you is visible on your screen. I'm not quite sure if it's visible, if it's clear. I'm trying to give the best explanation of the conflict through this day-to-day map. I just want it to be very clear. Okay, let's continue. So again, there's going to be a huge pocket here. And I want you to notice how the red moves. Here it comes. It's going to be fast. Boom, right there. Okay? So there was a huge push at the center in that area. Now, this is towards, I'm guessing this is towards the direction of Bakhmut. And the Battle of Bakhmut would end It would end in May 20, 2023, so we're not there yet. But this is in the Donbass and Lugansk regions. And this is not yet the end of the battle, but I want you to focus on what is moving and how it moved, because Russian tactics were very, very one-dimensional in the beginning of the conflict. There was a lot of frontal and center pushes, okay? Remember that. There was a lot of pushes militarily at the center. This is something that is not conventional in major operations in war. Pushing at the center is not the best idea. The Russians would later learn, but a lot of the movement that you see early in the conflict, it's a push at the center. This is a bloodbath. This is you need a lot of grit. Okay, this is where they call it the war of attrition. We'll continue. Now here it's already pushed, and we're moving into 2023 soon. No major updates yet in 2022. You just have to keep studying the map. Okay, here goes another major shift. Now, this is... How many days was that? Let's just say it's about a month, okay? We're in August 20. We're in August 20 right now. The map right now is still very, very red here in the Kharkiv Oblast. Now we're gonna see another huge withdrawal. A huge, this one right now, this one would make the one in Kiev look like baby work. Why is this one more significant? Well, this one is more significant because it was on the Eastern Front. And this one made huge news at the time. When the Russian Federation tactically retreated their people and their forces from north of the capital of Ukraine, it didn't really make that big news. Why? Because it was just a front that was unnecessary. But on the Eastern Front, in the Kharkiv Oblast region, when they retreated, I don't know the name of the river, but they moved their forces east of a small river compared to the Dnieper. That one made huge news. The counteroffensive that the Ukrainians were waiting for, it was all over the news. I don't know if you guys remember. When the Russians did this tactical retreat, it made national news. Check it out. International news, rather. And it continues. Boom. Now, again, as a person who considers himself not intelligent, but I feel like I have something in between my ears, when this was happening, you have to realize the casualties were not massive. No huge casualties. There was not a lot of prisoners taken. There was not a lot of insubordination, right? There was not a lot of people going MIA. This was very well planned. This was a beautiful tactical retreat, because later on in the conflict, you're going to see envelopments of the Ukrainian military where you see high casualties, high prisoners. You see a lot of insubordination and a lot of people on the Ukrainian side just abandoning their positions, okay? So let's go back to the map. It was a beautiful withdrawal of their positions. Of course, they did leave armament, but armament is replaceable. Human lives are not. Remember that. So we're going to continue looking here. We're still here in 2022. This is the second major tactical retreat by the Russian Federation, and the most important one until that time, okay? The next one is going to be even more impressive and more important than the one we just saw. When this one happened here in the Kharkiv region, the Ukrainians were offered peace. but they denied it. They were feeling victorious. They were given many opportunities. Let's continue. All right, let's see here. Okay, there we go. This is a perfect place to pause. I want you to look at where the line is now, okay? I want you to notice where my mouse is dragging. Okay, where my mouse is dragging. Essentially, this is where the line was drawn by the Russian Federation. We're not going to see them go back much further than what we just saw, and now the numbers are going to be started to be pumped in. Early in the conflict, because the Ukrainians had already planned to join NATO and fight for NATO, the Donbass region was so heavily militarized. You can see the military count is almost close to 300,000, and the Russians aren't even to 200,000. Early in the conflict on the Eastern Front, the Russians were sometimes close to 1-to-2 ratio in some parts of the front line. Close to 1-to-2 ratio. In a front line this massive, in a front line where it's hundreds of kilometers, right? Hundreds of kilometers. When you are at a disadvantage 1-to-2, it's insane. So the fact that the Russians had been fighting for 8 months at a 1-to-2 disadvantage on a front line this massive, it's commendable militarily. Let's continue. Remember, look at this front line here. Okay? As the numbers start growing on the Russian side, you're going to start seeing a different type of war. But before we get to that, look at this. This is now the third tactical retreat by the Russian Federation, and each one just gets even more important. We started off with the one on top of the the one in Kiev. Then we saw the one in Kharkiv Oblast. The first one was important, of course, but the second one was way more important. Why? Because it was on the Eastern Front and there was a lot of forces. The third one in the Kherson region, check this out. Look at this red here, okay? That has to be about, I would say, maybe 10 to 20, 30,000 men on the west side of the river. Let's see how long it takes for them to get over. It takes about 10 days. It takes about 10 days. Of course, they had planned it. They had already decided they were going to go east of the river, but that one by far saved so many lives, because a river crossing, a river of that magnitude, if the Ukrainians were a little bit smarter militarily, they could have caught them on the western side. They could have caught them and enveloped them so badly, but the Russians managed to cross 20, 30,000 men. It's insane. That after this war is over, that is going to be studied. Not only this one, but of course the one in the Kharkiv region, but moving 20 to 30,000 men across a river that big with drones, with long-range missiles, with modern air force, to do that, impressive. It's not talked about enough how many lives were saved. I don't even think people mention this week or two after it happened, but for someone like me, who I fought in Afghanistan in trenches and having to cross small rivers with a stupid rifle over my head and fighting to cross a damn river, a river of that magnitude under constant artillery shelling, drones, and an actual air force, because the Ukrainians have been armed for 10 years by NATO. To pull that off, unbelievable, okay? Unbelievable. Now, the Ukrainians would later call this the liberation of Kherson city. This is another fake victory for the Ukrainians, as again, there were no major casualties, there were no major prisoners taken, there was not a lot of people defecting. These are the three things that you have to look for in a major battle. If you want to claim victory, you have to claim victory through taking inflicting high casualties. This is the order of importance: inflicting high casualties, taking prisoners, and or causing the enemy to defect, and then take territory. Territory is not the most important thing in war. This is why when you saw the Russians take a bunch of territory, they gave it up. In the beginning of the conflict, you saw them spread in the Blitz, but they gave it away because this is not the most important thing in a war. Inflicting casualties, taking prisoners, and causing the enemy to defect. These are the top three things that you want to do in a war. Taking land is not. You saw the same mistake by Napoleon when they went towards the Russians. You saw the same mistake by the Germans in Operation Barbarossa. Okay? Now, let's continue, but I'm going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to take a 5-minute break to answer some of your guys' questions. If you're enjoying this military analysis, let me know. If you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. I've been wanting to do this live for a long time. I hope that it's educational. I hope that it brings a light to the conflict and the failed negotiations, because what's happening on the battlefield plays a huge role into why Ukraine hasn't accepted the peace terms, why Russia hasn't accepted the peace terms, and why the Europeans and NATO haven't accepted the peace terms. Because all of these players are, Russia and the United States are the top players, Europe, and then Ukraine. Ukraine is the smallest, takes the smallest bite. Okay, let's see. When do you think the war will end? Have there already been 4 major battles? No, there haven't. There hasn't. So I coined, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I coined the term for this conflict, the major battles. When Scott Ritter, when all these other generals or whatever the hell they are, whenever all these military people talk about war, they usually talk about the war is going to end this next year because Ukraine is already out of resources. I don't look at it that way. The way I look at it is militarily. So the first major battle was the Battle of Bakhmut. The second major battle was the Battle of Avdiivka. And there hasn't been another major battle. Bakhmut was a true meat grinder. Avdiivka was not. Okay? Pokrovsk is not a major battle yet because it has not given the amount of casualties necessary for it to be considered a major battle. Another thing that is causing these battles not to be major is the new tactic that Russia is using, which I'm going to break down later. But this is a great question. I predict that Ukraine will be forced to seek for peace after the next 2 major battles. And right now, they're not looking like huge operations on the map. I hope that answers your question. Later on, as we're looking at the map, I will guess where the next major battle can take place. And I hope that you're here for that. So if anybody has more questions, I would love to answer some of your guys' questions. Again, if you're not subscribed, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe. It's absolutely free to subscribe to this channel. Will I open a separate military and geopolitical channel eventually? I think that if this channel ever gets to 100,000, I will retire YouTube and just dedicate myself to making such content, because I feel like there's a huge hole for true military analysis. A lot of the people who make videos, I mean, I don't want to insult anybody, but even with my small military experience, I see things only militarily. I don't look at the politics. I don't look at the media. I look at a problem, and I put myself in that position. The biggest amount of men that I've led in combat operations was a squad. The biggest group of men that I led in other types of operations is a platoon size. So in the military, it scales up significantly, but the task doesn't really. If you're a sergeant of Marines, you're doing the job of a lieutenant or even a captain. So just take that however you will. How many casualties to make it a major battle? Well, for there to be considered a major battle, you're going to be looking at 40 to 50,000 men. These numbers were reached with Bakhmut. These numbers were reached with Avdiivka because of the significance of those places. So when we get to the map, when we get to Bakhmut, I will explain to you what happened. In about 3 minutes, I'm going to continue the show. This is a really good question by Shifu Zenichi. Really good question, and I'm going to answer this when it comes, okay? But you're looking at about 40 to 50,000 casualties, makes it a major battle. Not casualties, not only deaths, but I mean also wounded, because some men are wounded beyond repair. And if you're getting advertisements, I'm sorry, this is just how it works, guys. I need to run the show here. My brother Stoshik says, do Russia people in your area believe the special military operation would lead to a larger world war? Actually, no. You know, Stoshik, the Russian people that I know, and I have a lot of veteran friends, they know that they're fighting right now the war that is going to stop the enemy, because they know that they're fighting NATO in Ukraine. So they know that when they defeat NATO in Ukraine, it's going to be the end of this problem. The Russian people believe that they're fighting all of the evil in one place. This is not the world's problem. It seems to be Russia's fight. So I don't think that Russia would allow this to be a world war. The people from Russia, they've taken the burden on their backs, and they've agreed in their hearts and their souls that they're going to defeat the enemy here and now. This is what they're thinking. So I hope that answers your question, brother. Thank you so much for asking that. I appreciate it. About 70,000 AFU troops died in Kursk. Yes, so the Kursk, how can I say this? Kursk was a huge operation of many battles, right? This was more of a campaign. This was a campaign for the liberation of the Suja region in the Kursk, in the Kursk Oblast, in the Suja, the city. This was a major operation. This was a campaign, not one single battle, right? So I guess you can call this a major campaign. I hope that makes sense, Comrade King. There's a difference between a campaign and a battle, a single battle for one city. Okay, Suja was a city, but it was the campaign of the Kursk campaign, and we're going to get to see it on the map. I can make some future predictions of this war. Let me just continue with this map. Okay, thank you guys so much for those questions, and I'm going to continue. And remember, subscribe, put the notifications on. I appreciate your guys' support. Okay, now we're going to continue. Where we left off is right below me was the last tactical retreat by the Russian Federation. They would go east of the Dnieper. You can see a clear visible, there was a huge river here. You can see it. Okay. Right now, I call it, how the map looks right now, this is where the lines buckle. Okay, look at the time, look at the year. This is a fascinating thing for military people. This is 2022 in November. Imagine this. It is November and winter is coming. If you're the Russian forces, you've already done 3 major tactical retreats, one from the north of Kiev, one in the Kharkiv region, and one in the Kherson region. Winter is coming, and now the lines buckle. You start to see a clear shape to the front line. And now you know that when summer comes, major operations will happen. You know that you will be ready by next spring to move. When winter comes, you can bring in heavy equipment because the ground will be strong enough to carry this. And you know that when spring comes, you're going to have to dash forward into the next operations. It's going to be such an interesting 2023 on the map. Let's go ahead and look. We can talk about the naval and sea blockades and all that after we get to the next portion. Please, guys, keep in mind, Bakhmut has not yet ended. Let's continue. This is winter, the lines have buckled. Notice no major changes into December, okay? Let's continue. We're heading into January, no major changes. Here we are in January 2023. There was a small push here. Look where my mouse is, okay? Follow my cursor, guys. Follow my cursor because the Russian Federation is going to continue its one-trick pony attack, which later gets expanded. They learned, guys. Check it out. Look at my cursor here. Boom. Another major push. Another thrust from the center. These huge pushes from the center are so bloody. This is not the style of fighting you want to do with the front line this massive. And later on, again, the Russians are going to show you what they've learned. Here we go. We're going into February of 2023. No major changes, no major changes. Here we are going into March of 2023. No major changes. We're starting to see a little bit of movement here. Now, this is going to give you guys... Oh, you can't see the cursor? Can you guys not see my mouse? Oh my gosh, have I been just randomly pointing at the map? Let me know if my mouse is, if you guys can see my mouse. If not, I have an idea of how I can show you guys. Okay. Finally, someone tells me. Okay, I'll show you. 1 second. It's time to bring out the babushka. Can you guys see my babushka? This is Babushka Z. If you guys are members of the channel, you guys can see this is Babushka Z. She, of course, was made famous for her Soviet Union flag coming out. So if you guys are members of the channel, I believe we do have Babushka Z, don't we? No, we don't have her. Oh, I took her off? No, she's right there. Nice. So what you guys are going to see is Babushka Z is going to show you where it is, okay? So let's continue. So please pay close attention here next to Babushka Z. Next to Babushka Z, you're going to see a lot of fingers starting to appear. Oh, yeah, it was a victory flag. You're going to start seeing a lot of fingers, okay? These fingers coming out of the front line. This is not something that the Russians were doing in the beginning of the conflict. When the lines buckled, they start pushing, probing into different directions, but not like in the beginning. In the beginning of the conflict, they were so sporadic everywhere, and logistics were not able to hold the front lines. But if you see where Babushka Z is right here, right north of her, opa. Right north of Babushka Z, there's one small finger. And right here, there's going to be other fingers pointing out. So the Babushka is essentially letting us know these are the areas of focus. Now it's time to explain to you what's going to happen in Bakhmut, because in 2023, that is the first major battle that ends in 2023 in the month of May. So we're here now. Check this out. The Battle of Bakhmut is coming to an end right next to Babushka, okay? Please pay attention right next to her how much red we're going to see. Focus on the area next to Babushka. So when it gets to May, right now we're in January and they're still pushing, Here we go, February. This is the Battle of Bakhmut happening, guys. Babushka is showing you guys where the battle is taking place. Did you see how much movement happened right next to Babushka? So, let's keep watching here, because now that is the Battle of Bakhmut. On the map, it doesn't look that impressive, and I'm going to explain why. During this time, it was Wagner who took control of operations in the front of the Bakhmut region. I believe you guys are aware of who Wagner is. I believe you guys are well educated in what happened in Bakhmut. They were using prisoners. They were hell-bent on taking the city straight on. This was the first major battle of the Ukrainian-Russian war, and actually it was the first battle that got huge attention from the Russians and the Ukrainians. It made so much news around the world. It would later be known as the meat grinder. And Russia made a huge mistake taking this city from the center. This is the first time and the last time that Russia would ever do another meat grinder style battle. Believe it or not, the war of attrition is not real like the Battle of Bakhmut, because that would be the first and the last time that the Russians would ever take a city from the center. And I'm going to prove it to you by showing you the remainder of the conflict, because from now on, Russia is going to island hop. Island hopping was a term coined in the Second World War in the Pacific Theater. In the Pacific Theater, the Marine Corps with the Navy were going from island to island, only choosing to fight in certain islands. Some islands they would deem not important and they simply did not try to take them. That's why it's called island hopping. The Russians are using the same tactic but on the ground. And what they're doing is they're double enveloping cities. The next major battle would be the Battle of Avdiivka, and it would be double enveloped and encircled. Every battle after Bakhmut is a double envelopment. This is something that nobody talks about, but the Russians learned their lesson. The Russians realized that they cannot throw people at the center anymore. The front line is so massive that they can envelop. If you look at the map, and we're going to look at the map, every battle after Bakhmut has been a double envelopment. And not only that, Bakhmut was a failure of a battle. I think it was, what was his name? One second. Okay, let's see. I think Maharbal. I think Maharbal, the general of Hannibal, told him, Hannibal, you know how to gain victories, but you don't know how to use them. So during this time, the Russian Federation had a major victory in Bakhmut, but they did not know how to exploit that victory. Okay, this term or this saying from Maharbal to Hannibal, Hannibal, you know how to gain victory, but you do not know how to use it. This is something that the Russians would never do again. The Russians would learn their lesson. They would stop taking cities at the center, and they would stop not abusing a victory. From now on, every battle after this will be a double envelopment, and they will push forward. Pay attention to the map. So the Battle of Bakhmut was here where Babushka is. Now the Battle of Avdiivka is going to be somewhere in this region. And I want you to focus around this region where Babushka Z is. You can see after the Battle of Bakhmut, there's not a lot of movement in that area. Why? Because the Russians did not know how to use this victory. I'm going to zoom in on this. Because the remainder of the conflict is going to be here. Okay? There would be only one major battle in 2023. You can see now the front lines are buckling again. They're holding firm as we're going into the deep months. We're going into the deep months here. We're almost to winter. But just look how much has moved. When we see a huge jump, it's going to be Avdiivka. but this is going to happen in 2024. As we go into the winter months, things become a little bit more static, but do pay attention to the fingers that are moving. There's an envelopment happening up here. There's a cauldron that's happening. Okay, 2024 is Avdiivka campaign. Pay attention to that. Now let me see. By the way, am I still live? Let me know if this live is still happening. February 24. Okay, so the Battle of Avdiivka, I have to find it on the map. Here it is. I see it. Pay attention, guys. Pay attention because this is really small. Right here. You see this cauldron here? You see this in double envelopment that's happening? Right next to Babushka, that is where the Battle of Avdiivka is taking place. Now, interestingly enough, the Russians would envelop this city in record time, and after this city falls, it's going to open hell's gates for the Ukrainians, because this was the linchpin. They would be bombing Donetsk city from Avdiivka. This was the city that was holding the entire Donbass by the balls. Okay, check out what happens. You're going to see a closing of the envelopment. In 2024 campaign. Boom. There was a jump there. Closed. Here we go, here we go. Movement, movement, movement. Movement. Just pay attention how much is moving after the fall of Avdiivka. Look at that. Look at that. You see that finger just pointing out? To some people, this is not significant, but on a battlefield with a major front line like the one we see now, is massive. Here's another envelopment happening here. This is going to be the Russian style of fighting from now on. I've told you, after Bakhmut, you're going to see envelopments, envelopments, envelopments. No more pushes at the center. It's fascinating to watch. Fascinating. Привет, brother. Welcome. It's just, I don't even know what to say when I see this. We didn't cover the Kursk operation, but that's something else that we can talk about perhaps on another military analysis, because in my opinion, it is something that is unfortunate that happened. But just look at how steadily it's been moving on the Donbass front. No more pushes at the center, no more major operations where they just push the logistic trains. It's crazy. We'll stop right there and take some more questions. I just want you to know that the Battle of Bakhmut was the pivotal change for the Russians. They learned their lesson. They would stop taking cities at the center. They would stop not exploiting victories. How do you think the peace talks either failing or going through will affect people moving to Russia? So I've been living in Russia through maybe 3 or 4 failed peace talks, and there hasn't been a big wave of Western immigrants. Okay, that's the truth. There hasn't been a huge wave of Western immigrants, but there has been a huge growth in Western tourism. A lot of people are coming to Russia as tourists. They're getting a taste of what it is. And I don't think that this peace talk, if it fails, I don't think is going to change anything. Prigozhin, is he still alive? Possibly. I don't think that Russia wants to take Odessa. Like militarily, it would be a nightmare to take Odessa. Militarily, Russia is not ready to take Odessa. If they get an unconditional surrender, it's still going to be years from now. The people who want Russia to take Odessa don't understand that if the West ever waged war on Russia again, everything west of the Dnieper is held to, they would not want to defend. Russia does not want things west of the Dnieper. Are more casualties coming from drones than from artillery? No. Impossible. Impossible. It's impossible. In the beginning of this war, the amount of casualties that came from artillery, drones cannot catch up. Drones cannot catch up. Impossible. In 2022 campaign, the amount of artillery that was shot, it was unreal. Are you affected by the 42 people? I don't know. I've never heard about that. What do you think about the future of Russia? I think that Russia is securing itself a stronger future. I think that Russia is going to be eye to eye with the United States militarily now and diplomatically after this conflict. So its future is looking bright. Before, the Russian Federation was like a little baby for the United States. The United States wasn't taking Russia seriously. But because it's this conflict, when it wins it, it's going to be forced to look eye to eye. Do you think they could get Odessa politically? Yes, they could. But they shouldn't. Russia should not try to take anything west of the Dnieper. Trust me. There's people that want Russia to go all the way to Istanbul. For me, it's ridiculous. My son is Russian. If there's still war in 18 years, my son will have to fight for your wet dreams. You're a lunatic if you want this kind of stuff. I'm not saying you. I'm talking about the dirty people who want constant war. Why more tourists? Well, there's more tourists coming from the West right now than there was in the 2022 because people are starting to wake up. People are starting to realize that Russia is actually a decent place to visit. How important would dropping sanctions for the Russians' economy? It's not the most important thing, but Russia would definitely benefit if they did. Russians would benefit from this because you need more competition. For Russian economy to grow, you need competition from the West. You need Russia to know where it needs to get better at. And if you have just an echo chamber of yourself, it's not good. Russia benefits economically if the West is involved in commerce and trade and all these different things. Russia would benefit. It's the truth. Cuando todo termine, ¿te imaginas a Putin asistiendo a reunirse con países hostiles? No. So Martin asks if I can imagine Putin going through like future meetings with global powers like G8, G20. I don't think Putin cares about these people anymore. Will he go just for fun? Sure. What will Trump cutting military aid lead to? I don't think that Trump is cutting anything. They can say they're going to cut military aid, but they're still sending military aid. It's the truth. These people will arm the enemies of... The people will always arm the enemies of Russia. Okay? People who don't like Russia will always arm people to fight Russia. Doesn't matter if they say we're not going to arm them. Again, guys, please do consider putting like so that more people can get reached by this live. To be honest, I think Russia has plenty of land. It's more about politics and NATO expansion. Of course, we all know that, and that this is true. Will Ukraine get long-range missiles, and will the Europeans step in directly? That's a really good question. The Europeans have already stepped in through mercenaries. A lot of countries have sent their men to train in this conflict. Poland, for sure, has sent men to train. Sweden, for sure, has sent men to train. Finland, for sure, has sent men to train. Germany, for sure, has sent men to train. So I don't think that they will ever step in directly, but they've already stepped in the tens of thousands. Ukraine already has long-range missiles. Ukraine has everything except an atomic bomb. Whatever they say on the television is only half of what they've already done. Okay? You just have to understand that. Militarily, it's not good to say, we're going to send you this in the future. They've already sent a lot of the things. Russia is not the richest and the strongest, but it is the biggest. Russia is not the richest by far, and it's not the strongest by far, but it is the strongest. And it is the richest, naturally richest country, but it is not producing as the richest. Do you think it's possible NATO will use Kazakhstan in... No, it will not. Impossible. Kazakhstan cannot do that. Kazakhstan is landlocked, essentially. It has no route to an open ocean, so it cannot be fed. It's not connected directly, I don't believe, with the NATO country. Let me see. Yes, so no. So Kazakhstan is not bordering any NATO country, and it's landlocked out of an open ocean or sea. It's landlocked out of an ocean, so it's very bad for them. So yes, in terms of resources, it's the richest, but it's not the strongest. Hello, welcome to this live. Comrade King says, what will Ukraine's next PR stunt be? You know, I've been thinking about this. And thank you so much for the support. I understand the interaction is important. I was actually thinking about this in my predictions. Somebody asked what are my predictions for this conflict, and I'm going to tell you my most important prediction that already came true a little bit. If this conflict goes on for another year, Ukraine will start doing more unconventional warfare, like the Taliban. They will do more unconventional warfare. They will I'll leave it at that. So my prediction is their next PR stunt is unconventional warfare, which they've already started doing by coming into the Russian Federation and causing havoc. Are you worried about veterans coming home with PTSD? Yes, I've talked about this. And we've already talked about this, Michael. Oh, my anti-mining tools. So, I've created 2 prototypes by drawing for anti-personnel mines. If the war were to end next year before I have to gain my residency, if I could ever do humanitarian work and help out the people of the affected regions, I've created rollers for anti-personnel mines for people's backyards, for people's front yards, for people's like city areas. And I'm going to describe it to you. Hopefully you guys can understand. So I want you to imagine a metal rod, a pole made of really strong metal that extends, okay? I'm a sapper. I've already experienced stuff like this, so I know this works. Anyways, you have to imagine an extendable pole with clips. You can make it as long as you want. On the front of it is going to be one of those big barrels where you burn fire, like chemical containers, barrels, sorry. Chemical, it could be plastic or it could be metal, but preferably metal. You put a piece of metal through it and you fill it with cement. On the sides, you attach metal rods and it goes in front of your pole. And what it does is it rolls in front. The weight of that barrel filled with cement should push the blast down. For anti-personnel mines, this is perfect. If you build one of these, one person can clear his own backyard. It's probably going to cost maybe $50 to manufacture an The most expensive thing would be the cement. But you can fill up the barrel with water, anything that's heavy. All it is a metal pole with a roller in front as the thing that's going to detonate the mine. This is only for anti-personnel mines. I don't know if that makes any sense, but the barrel in front works like this. This is, of course, a big barrel. This gets filled with cement. And when you're pushing it this way, it's going over the mines and the blast goes down because of the weight. Like this. It's going to spin. These metal, there's going to be 2 metals here and the extension will push and it'll roll. This is good enough for anti-personnel mines, and if you have a long enough metal rod, you can use it for anti-tank mines. As long as you get a long enough distance. But for anti-tank mines, all you have to do is get a piece of TNT and just put it on top. It's not a problem. But what I focus on is something that people can make themselves. If when this conflict is done, if I have the opportunity to make a small team or go by myself, I want to show the people these ideas that I have for the anti-personnel mines, but I also have ideas for, like I said, anti-tank mines. I want to give classes on how to defuse them, how to dispose of them. That's just that's what my plan was. That somebody asked me about my plans for the mines. This is something that I've been wanting to do. Yeah, super crazy. You are an OG. So yeah. Does anybody have any other questions? Hi Dan, watching from Australia. Of course you are, Joseph. So cool to have you. Some of you guys who write comments right now, I remember you guys from the comment sections in my videos. Will Ukraine invade Transnistria to pressure Russia? It would be a huge mistake, because Transnistria is actually part of Moldova, but it's not. To cross into Transnistria, you're looking at a problem with Moldova, looking at a problem with Romania and NATO. It's a nightmare. It's a total nightmare. I think there's 1,500 troops there. What are you going to do? Take them prisoners and then what? And then hold Transnistria and then look like a jackass? Horrible military move, because the objective is not worth the gains. Remember, what I told you guys in the beginning, you want to inflict casualties, you want to take prisoners, or you want to have your enemy defect. By taking Transnistria, you're not really doing a lot of that. Does that make sense? I didn't see your question, man. If you have a question, just ask again. I'm also not your dog to answer whatever you want whenever you want. Martin says, Trump is still trying to invade Venezuela. Yeah, he's crazy. What do you think about freedom of speech in Russia? I think that freedom of speech in every country is not real. Freedom of speech is limited even in the United States. I don't think that freedom of speech is limited to a point of oppression in Russia. I believe that the freedom of speech that you get in Russia is fair, and if you are a normal human being, you're never going to have any problems. I don't think that this exists in the UK, right? The level of freedom of speech is much higher in Russia than it is in the UK. There's more freedom of speech in Russia than in the UK. So that's something for you to think about. Who is the most strongest country militarily? Okay, that's a good question. And a lot of you guys are not going to like the answer, but it's a toss-up. It's a toss-up. You know, let's just say there's three main people, okay? Russia has the best infantrymen. Russia has the best army for land. The United States has the best navy, but not the best military for land. So those two will cancel themselves out, okay? The strongest military is probably the one country that can make those two fight, which is China. Which is ridiculous. My answer is only based off of what I believe would be the worst case scenario. The Russians and the United States would hate themselves, right? This is like they've been enemies forever. But China's always in the back room waiting. So anyways, the strongest country can change from one day to the next. Russia has the most combat experience. That's correct. But having the most combat experience doesn't mean that you are the strongest. The Germans had the most combat experience in the air. The Luftwaffe had the most combat experience, but they had a shortage of men. Also, the Germans in the Second World War had the most experience on the ground, but they had the smallest military. Just understand that combat experience does not equal military power. Combat experience only means you have groups of people that can potentially equal a victory. Okay? Does China have combat experience? Yes, they do. I'm going to tell you right now, and this is my speculation. The Russians have, no, let me put it this way. The Russians have encountered, yes, people from Finland, Georgia, United States, Poland, Finland, all of these people. Russians have fought them. I'm gonna guarantee you that those countries have sent their militaries to fight on the Ukrainian side, but they haven't said it out loud. There has to have been at least one or two Chinese guys that have gone over to learn from this conflict. We see the North Koreans have done it. The North Koreans have openly made a deal with the Russians because they have openly sent their men to combat action, which is fascinating that North Korea has more conventional full-scale war experience than the United States. That's something that you can think about. My boy Fernie says, how do you think a good way to fix Russian population growth? Yeah. I think that a good way to fix population growth is not promoting Russia as a values country, but an economical country. Like, Russia does have a lot of economic benefits. Russia should focus on that, promote itself as a place where you can come live better economically. Perhaps you're not going to be the richest, but you're not going to be living as a slave to taxes and debt and payments. Okay? So I think Russia has to sell itself as a place where you're not going to be on a rat hamster wheel. I hope I answered your question. In case Ukraine starts striking Moscow with long-range missiles, will Russia respond? Of course. You don't touch Moscow. The Russians and the ancestors of the Russians have seen Moscow burn, have seen the enemies at the gates many times on Moscow, and they will never allow it again. Well, Russia has the combat experience and they have the resources and they can use drones. Wrong. Wrong. Russia doesn't have the resources. So you have to think a little bit before you say that Russia has the resources, okay? Russia has the biggest population in Europe, I think, right? But its resources are in the ground and Russia's not fully in a military economy, okay? So before you say that, you have to I live in Russia. Russia is not war ready like you're talking about. Just understand that. It doesn't make any sense. Russia is not fully in a military economy. Have you heard about the law where you get locked up if you watch content that's considered extreme? No, that's not real. No. You have to actually be a foreign agent to be a foreign agent in Russia. What's your opinion on the military capabilities of Europe armies without U.S. assistance? Very good question. And this is the kind of question that I like to answer. So, European capabilities. The strongest military in Europe is in Asia. What the heck? How did that happen? What did I do something? That was weird. So Ivan is asking, what is your opinion on the military capabilities of European armies without U.S. assistance? Turkey is the strongest country in Europe. Their capabilities are subpar. After that, I don't think that another country has the ability to wage war. Like, you have to think about population, okay? The reason why the Russians are capable of holding the front line is because of their population. The population on these other European cities are so small, okay? Turkey is well populated, so militarily speaking, very, very low capabilities because very low populations. Oh, sorry. So, how will Russia respond? I think Russia will respond with hell. They haven't really been bombing Kiev indiscriminately. If you pay attention to what the Israel did to the Gaza Strip, they flattened it. What makes you think Russia can't flatten a city? They've flattened other cities before. If they were to touch Moscow, they could flatten Kiev. They could flatten it. If they wanted to, they could flatten it. So what I'm telling you is if they were to bomb Moscow, which they already have with drones, but if they would bomb it significantly, they would see flattened areas in the Kiev region. Do you think after the war some Eastern European nations would grow closer to Russia, like Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think right now, if a country is close to Russia, they will be closer. If they're in the middle, they will get closer. But if they're already against Russia, they will only continue because they're going to get pulled by the rest of Europe. Right now, it's black and white, my friend. There's no more going this way. No. It's black and white. Russia will also never forgive. Yes, but also you have to understand, do not believe these people who say how weak they are. I'm not saying that they're weak. I'm just saying that they're not at the level that Ukraine and Russia are at. If we were to replace Ukraine military capabilities, if we were to take the Ukrainian military away and put in the British military, the Russian will break that line easily. Okay, pay attention to what I'm going to tell you. Imagine taking away Ukrainian military and putting Spain military on the front line with their population, with their military capabilities. They would have crumbled. Put them one by one, Portugal, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany. Put them one by one, they would crumble. But they're not weak. They're just not at that level. Altogether, they're strong. Altogether, if they were to muster millions of men in the Ukrainian front line, this would make a big deal. It would make a big problem for the Russian Federation. That's a world war. Well, I think we've been going for almost an hour and a half. I think I've answered a lot of your questions. I think this has been a very different type of live. If you haven't put like, please put like. It supports the channel. If you're not subscribed, it doesn't cost you anything. I think I'm going to be doing this type of live in the future again. Do you think, what is Russia's stance with Venezuela? I don't think that Russia should even think about Venezuela right now. Venezuela is nothing that they should be thinking about. They have real problems at their border. The most that Russia should do is say, hey, the United States, Venezuela is a sovereign country. We know your excuse for drugs is false. There's more drugs in Mexico and they're right next to you. What are you doing in the Caribbean? So, I'll see you guys on the next one. I published a video, guys, here. If you're still here, for some reason I think this video got shadow blocked, like shadow banned. Check this video out. Tell me what you think. I've pinned my most recent video. Please go watch it, guys. Open a new tab and just drink a little bit of coffee if you're just waking up. Put it in your ears and listen to what I have to say about this conflict, because this is absolute blasphemy. This peace deal stuff is ridiculous. There's not going to be a peace deal until there's another 2 major battles. Ukraine is just hell-bent on looking for a PR stunt. What do you think about the protests in Mexico? I think the Mexican people have to continue. The fight is not over.